My phone buzzed at 2:47 a.m. with a bank alert that made my blood freeze in my veins. Unauthorized transaction. $1,500.
Gone.
As I stared at my depleted account balance, my hands trembling in the blue glow of my phone screen, I never imagined the digital thief was sleeping just down the hallway, my own 18-year-old stepson, who would soon look me dead in the eyes and accuse me of neglect while he funded his extravagant party lifestyle with my hard-earned money. What happened next became a masterclass in consequences that he'll never forget. Hit that subscribe button right now because today's letter to Ray involves digital deception, family manipulation, and the most satisfying form of poetic justice I've ever witnessed. Kieran is my husband Thaddeus's son from his first marriage. When Thaddeus and I got together 4 years ago, Kieran was 14 years old, angry about his parents' divorce, resentful of me stepping into his family dynamic, and carrying all that typical teenage baggage that comes with major life changes. I knew walking into this relationship that building trust with Kieran would be my biggest challenge, and honestly, I threw myself into it with everything I had. I'm talking about driving him to soccer practice twice a week when Thaddeus couldn't leave his construction site. Staying up until midnight, helping him understand calculus concepts that made my brain hurt. Learning to make his grandmother's famous lasagna from scratch because his biological mother, Evelyn, never cooked and he missed having homemade meals. I attended every single one of his soccer games, even the away games that meant driving 2 hours each direction. I helped him study for his SATs, taught him how to drive stick shift when Thaddeus was too impatient, and listened to hours of teenage drama about friends and crushes and college anxiety. By the time Kieran turned 18 last October, I genuinely believed we'd found our rhythm as a blended family. The angry, resentful 14-year-old had evolved into what seemed like a mature young man who actually enjoyed my company. He was a senior in high school, talking excitedly about college plans, and had even started calling me by name instead of just avoiding addressing me directly. Since Thaddeus worked 60-hour weeks running his construction business, it was often just Kieran and me at home in the evenings. We'd binge-watch Netflix series together, he'd tell me about school drama and friend conflicts, and I felt like maybe, just maybe, I was finally breaking through to this kid who'd lost so much stability in his young life. But here's where I should have been paying closer attention. Looking back, the red flags were practically neon, but I was so invested in trusting him and maintaining our newly peaceful relationship that I ignored my gut instincts. It started with the designer clothes that appeared seemingly overnight. One day Kieran was wearing his usual Target jeans and thrift store t-shirts, and the next he's walking around in $400 joggers and limited edition hoodies that I knew cost more than I spent on clothes in 6 months. When I casually asked where he got the money for such expensive items, he'd shrug with that trademark teenage nonchalance and say he'd been saving from his part-time job at the local movie theater. Now, I'm not great at math, but I knew the theater paid $15 an hour, and Kieran worked maybe 12 hours a week on weekends. After taxes, that's less than $200 a month. Yet somehow he could afford $800 sneakers, a top-of-the-line gaming headset, and regular expensive dinners out with his girlfriend Miranda. My accountant brain was screaming that the numbers didn't add up, but my stepmother heart wanted to believe he was just being resourceful, maybe selling things online, maybe his biological mother was sending extra money, maybe he'd saved birthday and Christmas cash for longer than I realized. Then there was the new gaming setup that appeared in his room like magic. We're talking about a custom-built PC that I knew cost at least $3,000, dual monitors, professional-grade streaming equipment, and a chair that cost more than some people's rent. When Thaddeus asked about it, Kieran spun some story about winning it in an online tournament. Thaddeus, who barely understands how to use his smartphone, accepted this explanation without question. But I'd been around enough teenage gamers through my work to know that legitimate tournament winnings usually come with paperwork, publicity, and parental notification. None of which happened. The final red flag should have been his attitude shift around money discussions. Previously, Kieran had been almost obsessively careful about asking permission before spending anything. He'd check with Thaddeus or me before buying a $5 coffee, let alone major purchases. But suddenly, he was making expensive decisions without consultation and getting defensive when questioned about his spending. When I'd express concern about financial responsibility or suggest he save some money for college expenses, he'd roll his eyes and mutter about how I didn't understand his generation's relationship with money. I should have trusted my instincts. I should have insisted on seeing bank statements or pay stubs. I should have had a serious conversation with Thaddeus about monitoring our teenage son's sudden wealth. But I didn't want to be the suspicious stepmother who couldn't trust her stepson. I didn't want to damage the relationship we'd worked so hard to build over accusations that might be unfounded. So I ignored the voice in my head that was screaming that something was very, very wrong. Then came Tuesday, February 14th, Valentine's Day. The irony isn't lost on me that this betrayal happened on a day dedicated to love and trust. I was lying in bed next to Thaddeus, both of us exhausted from long workdays, when my phone lit up at 2:47 a.m. with a banking alert. I normally kept my phone on silent at night, but I'd been expecting an important work email and had forgotten to change the settings back. The notification sound jolted me awake, and I groggily reached for my phone, expecting to see some spam email or social media notification. Instead, I saw words that made my heart stop. Alert. Unauthorized transaction on account ending in 4429. Amount: $1,500. Time: 2:45 a.m. If this was not you, contact fraud services immediately. The room started spinning. $1,500.
Gone.
At almost 3 in the morning, I immediately sat up in bed, my hands shaking as I opened my banking app to confirm what I was seeing. There it was, clear as day, a withdrawal of $1,500 from my checking account, leaving me with a balance of $43. $43. In the account I used for mortgage payments, utilities, groceries, and every other essential expense. I felt like I was going to vomit. My first thought was that someone had skimmed my debit card at a gas station or a restaurant. My second thought was that there'd been some kind of banking error. My third thought, the one that made my chest tighten with dread, was much more personal and much more devastating. I crept out of bed, trying not to wake Thaddeus, and went to the kitchen to call the bank's fraud line. I spent 45 minutes on hold, pacing our hardwood floors in my pajamas, trying to control my breathing and make sense of what was happening. Finally, a fraud specialist named Marcus came on the line. "Ma'am, I'm showing the transaction you're calling about, and I need to ask you some questions to verify your identity and gather information about the unauthorized charge." I answered all his security questions: mother's maiden name, first pet's name, the street I grew up on, information I'd shared countless times over family dinners and casual conversations, never thinking anyone was memorizing these details for future use. "Mrs. Celestine, I'm looking at the transaction details, and this is interesting. The withdrawal was initiated online using correct login credentials and was authenticated using your security question answers. Do you have your debit card with you right now?" I ran to my purse. My card was there, exactly where I'd left it. "Yes, I have my card." "So, how did someone access my account?" "Ma'am, this transaction was initiated by someone who had access to your online banking username, password, and security question answers. Is there anyone in your household who might have this information?" The question hit me like a physical blow. I knew the answer before I even let myself think it through completely.
Kieran.
He was the only person who could have overheard all my security information during casual family conversations. He was the only one who'd been present when I'd mentioned my first pet's name while looking at old photo albums. He was the only person in our house tech-savvy enough to navigate online banking systems and cover his digital tracks. But even knowing the logical answer, I couldn't quite make myself believe it. This was the kid I'd spent 4 years nurturing and supporting. This was the young man I'd helped with college applications just 2 weeks earlier. This was my stepson who'd hugged me goodnight just 6 hours before this transaction took place.
I
need to investigate this internally before I can give you more information, I told Marcus. Can you temporarily freeze my account and reverse this transaction? I can place a hold on your account, but the reversal process will require a police report if this was indeed unauthorized. The system shows this transaction was authenticated properly, so we'll need law enforcement documentation to process a fraud claim. A police report against my 18-year-old stepson. The reality of the situation was starting to hit me, and it felt like drowning. I hung up with the bank and sat at my kitchen table, staring at my phone screen and trying to process what I was going to do next. Part of me wanted to wake up Thaddeus immediately and handle this as a united family front. Part of me wanted to march upstairs and confront Kieran right then and there. But a bigger part of me, the part that had been building a relationship with this kid for 4 years, wanted to give him the opportunity to confess voluntarily and make things right without destroying our family dynamics. I decided to wait until morning and approach Kieran privately first. Give him a chance to be honest with me before involving his father or escalating the situation. I spent the rest of the night lying awake, staring at the ceiling and trying to figure out exactly what I would say. The next morning, I found Kieran in the kitchen at 7:30, calmly eating a bowl of Lucky Charms like it was any other Wednesday. He was scrolling through his phone, probably looking at social media, completely unbothered by the financial chaos he'd created in my life just 5 hours earlier. The casual normalcy of the scene made my anger spike even higher. "Kieran, I need to talk to you about something important, and I need you to be completely honest with me." He didn't even look up from his cereal. "What's up, Celestine?" The fact that he could maintain such perfect composure while sitting across from someone he'd robbed just hours earlier was almost impressive in its sociopathic coldness. $1,500 disappeared from my bank account last night at 2:45 a.m. The bank says it was accessed using my correct login information and security questions. You wouldn't know anything about that, would you? This was his moment. This was his opportunity to confess, apologize, and start making things right before the situation escalated beyond repair. This was his chance to show me that the young man I'd invested in for 4 years had the character and integrity I'd hoped I was helping to develop. Instead, Kieran finally looked up from his Lucky Charms with an expression I'll never forget as long as I live. Not guilt, not shame, not even surprise. Pure, calculated defiance. "Prove it," he said, setting down his spoon with deliberate calmness. I felt my mouth fall open. In all the scenarios I'd imagined during my sleepless night, this wasn't one of them. "Excuse me? You heard me correctly. Prove I took anything from your account." "You can't, because you don't have any actual evidence linking me to this." He stood up, grabbed his backpack, and started walking toward the door like this was just another routine morning conversation about household chores. But then he turned back, and what he said next felt like a knife sliding between my ribs and twisting. "Besides, maybe if you actually cared about this family instead of just playing house and trying to replace my real mother, you'd know I needed that money for important stuff. But you're too wrapped up in your own little perfect life to notice anyone else's problems or struggles." The front door slammed behind him, leaving me sitting at the kitchen table feeling like I'd been emotionally sucker-punched. After 4 years of soccer games and homework help and homemade dinners and late-night heart-to-heart conversations, this is what I got. Theft, gaslighting, and the accusation that I was somehow the neglectful, uncaring party in this scenario. I called Thaddeus immediately, my voice barely holding steady as I explained what had happened. "Honey, slow down. You're talking really fast and I'm having trouble following. What exactly happened with your bank account?" When I walked him through the entire situation, the overnight withdrawal, the bank's explanation about authenticated access, Kieran's reaction when confronted, there was a long, uncomfortable pause on the other end of the line. "Celestine, are you absolutely certain it was Kieran? I mean, couldn't there be some other explanation?" That question hit me harder than his son's betrayal had. My own husband, doubting my assessment of the situation. My own husband, more willing to believe in some elaborate alternative scenario than accept that his son had stolen from his wife. Thaddeus. Who else could it possibly be? He's the only person in our house who could have known my security information. He's the only one with the technical skills to pull this off. And his reaction when I confronted him was basically a confession wrapped in defiance. "Look, I'll definitely talk to him when he gets home from school. But Celestine, he's been through so much with the divorce and adjusting to our blended family. Maybe there's more context to this situation that we don't understand yet. More context. Like there was some justifiable backstory that would explain away identity theft and emotional manipulation. The context, Thaddeus, is that your son stole $1,500 from the woman who has spent 4 years bending over backward to support him and build a relationship with him. The context is that when confronted with evidence of his crime, he chose to gaslight me and accuse me of neglect rather than take responsibility for his actions. I understand you're upset. I'm not upset, Thaddeus. I'm devastated. And if you can't see the difference, then we have much bigger problems than just Kieran's behavior. I hung up before the conversation could deteriorate further, but the damage was already done. Not only had my stepson betrayed my trust and stolen my money, but my husband was questioning my judgment and making excuses for criminal behavior. I felt completely alone in my own family. That evening, the confrontation I'd been dreading finally happened. Thaddeus called a family meeting in our living room, with me standing near the fireplace and both of them sitting on the couch like this was some kind of casual mediation session rather than addressing felony theft. Son, Celestine says money went missing from her account last night and she thinks you might know something about it. I want to give you the opportunity to explain your side of the story. Kieran looked back and forth between us, and I watched him make a calculated decision about how to play this scene. Then, like an actor stepping into a well-rehearsed role, he started to cry. Not real tears. I'd seen his genuine tears when his grandfather died 2 years earlier. These were strategic, manufactured, designed to manipulate his father's protective instincts. Dad, I'm really sorry. I did take the money, but you guys don't understand the pressure I'm under right now. Everyone at school has nice things, expensive clothes, the latest technology, and I felt like such an outsider. I just wanted to fit in and feel normal for once. Mom never sends enough money in her child support payments, and you're always working 60-hour weeks, so we never have time to talk about financial stuff and Celestine. He looked at me with such perfectly crafted hurt and disappointment. Celestine tries really hard, and I appreciate everything she does, but she doesn't really understand what it's like to be me. She's always making comments about responsible spending and budgeting, making me feel guilty for wanting normal teenage experiences. I felt like I couldn't come to either of you for help because I'd just get a lecture about money management instead of actual support. I felt my jaw clench so hard I thought my teeth might crack. Every word out of his mouth was a carefully constructed lie designed to shift blame and responsibility away from his criminal behavior and onto the adults who'd been supporting him unconditionally for years. You see? He turned to his father with those fake tears streaming down his face. She's doing it right now. Look at her expression. She's already judging me and getting ready to punish me instead of trying to understand why I felt like I had no other options. Thaddeus looked at me with this pleading expression, like I should just accept this manipulation and move on in the interest of family harmony. Celestine, he's genuinely sorry. He's explained why he felt like he needed to make this choice. He says he'll pay back every penny. Can't we work out some kind of payment plan and put this behind us? Work something out. Like we were negotiating a business arrangement instead of addressing identity theft, gaslighting, and emotional manipulation from someone who should have been treating me like family. No, I said quietly, my voice steady despite the rage building in my chest. No, we cannot work something out. He didn't just take my money, Thaddeus. He violated my privacy, accessed my personal accounts without permission, and when confronted about it, he chose to lie and then blame me for his criminal behavior. I looked directly at Kieran, who was still maintaining his wounded victim expression. You want to know what actual neglect looks like, Kieran? Neglect is me stopping everything I've been doing to support you for the past 4 years. No more rides to soccer practice when you miss the bus. No more staying up late to help you with homework assignments you've procrastinated. No more of your favorite homemade dinners. No more Netflix marathons or casual conversations about your day. You think I don't understand your struggles or care about this family? Fine. Let's see how much you miss having someone around who supposedly doesn't care. Both of them stared at me like I'd announced I was moving to Mars. Celestine, that seems a little extreme, Thaddeus started. What's extreme is that your 18-year-old son committed identity theft against his stepmother and your first instinct is to negotiate a payment plan instead of calling the police. What's extreme is that he's sitting here blaming me for his criminal behavior and you're acting like his emotional manipulation makes sense. I took a deep breath, trying to maintain my composure, while my entire world felt like it was shifting under my feet. Kieran, you have exactly 30 days to pay me back every single penny you stole, with interest for the inconvenience and violation of trust. If you don't, I'm filing a police report for identity theft and let the legal system handle the consequences of your choices. And until that money is back in my account with a genuine apology that doesn't include blaming me for your decisions, you're essentially invisible to me. I walked upstairs, closed our bedroom door, and finally allowed myself to cry. Not sad tears, angry tears. Frustrated tears. The kind of tears that come when you realize you've been playing chess while everyone else has been playing checkers, and you're the only one who didn't know the rules had changed. The next few weeks were absolutely torture for everyone in the house. Thaddeus kept trying to mediate, suggesting family counseling sessions, payment plans, and sit-down conversations where we could work through our feelings. He couldn't understand why I wouldn't just accept Kieran's apology and move forward with some kind of structured repayment arrangement. But I held my ground, and the practical consequences of losing my support became immediately apparent. When Kieran asked me to sign a permission slip for a school field trip, I handed it directly to his father, without saying a word. When he forgot his lunch and texted me to bring it to school, I deleted the message without responding. When he tried to engage me in casual conversation about homework or weekend plans, I would simply leave the room. Kieran's reaction to my boundaries went through several predictable phases. First came denial and minimization. He would make snide comments about me being overly dramatic and holding grudges over nothing. He told his friends at school that I was trying to break up his family because I never really wanted him around. He even called his biological mother to complain about how I was making his life miserable over a little money mistake. When the denial phase didn't get him the response he wanted, he moved into anger and escalation. He would slam doors, make passive-aggressive comments during family dinners, and generally try to make the household atmosphere so uncomfortable that I'd give in just to restore peace. He started leaving messes in common areas that he knew would bother me, playing his music louder than usual, and generally behaving like a toddler having an extended tantrum. But I maintained my boundaries consistently. No help with homework, no rides to extracurricular activities, no emotional support or casual conversation. When he tried to charm his way back into my good graces with compliments about my cooking or attempts at humor, I would serve everyone else dinner and leave his portion in the refrigerator with a note, "Microwave for 90 seconds." By the end of the first month, Kieran had managed to scrape together $800 from his part-time job and selling some of his expensive clothing items. But that still left $700 outstanding, and his attitude hadn't improved one bit. If anything, he seemed more resentful about having to pay me back than remorseful about stealing from me in the first place. "This is completely ridiculous," he complained to his father during one of their conversations that I pretended not to overhear. "She's punishing me way more than the crime actually deserves. It's just money. I already said I was sorry, and I'm paying her back. What more does she want from me? Just money. Like my financial security was some abstract concept instead of something I worked 50-hour weeks to maintain. Like the violation of trust was just a minor inconvenience that could be resolved with a casual apology. Son, I think Celestine is still processing the emotional impact of what happened. Give her some more time to cool down, and I'm sure we can work something out." But I wasn't interested in cooling down or working anything out. I was interested in Kieran understanding that actions have consequences, and that stealing from family members who love and support you isn't something you can just apologize away. Month 2 was when things started getting genuinely interesting. Without my academic support, Kieran's grades began slipping because I wasn't there to proofread his essays, explain difficult concepts, or help him stay organized with assignment due dates. He missed 2 important college interviews because he couldn't coordinate his own transportation and hadn't developed the life skills necessary to manage his schedule independently. His performance on the soccer team suffered because he had to figure out his own ride situation for practices and games, often arriving late or missing sessions entirely. For the first time, the practical value of the neglectful stepmother's contributions became crystal clear. Suddenly, all those rides I'd provided, meals I'd cooked, Homework sessions I'd facilitated and organizational support I'd offered weren't just taken for granted. They were desperately missed. But the real turning point came during month 3, and it involved Kieran's girlfriend, Miranda. Miranda was this genuinely sweet girl from his AP English class who'd been dating Kieran for about 8 months. She was one of those naturally kind people who always asked about my work, offered to help clean up after dinner, and seemed to genuinely enjoy spending time with our family. I'd grown quite fond of her, and she appeared to be a positive influence on Kieran's behavior and attitude. One evening in early May, while Kieran was upstairs supposedly working on college applications, Miranda lingered in the kitchen after dinner instead of heading up to his room like usual. "Celestine, can I ask you something kind of personal?" "Of course, sweetheart. What's on your mind?" She looked uncomfortable, fidgeting with the sleeves of her cardigan and avoiding eye contact. "Kieran told me you two had some kind of serious disagreement a few months ago, and that's why you don't help him with school stuff and rides anymore. But he won't give me any specific details about what happened. He just says it's complicated family stuff and gets really defensive when I ask questions." She paused, gathering courage for whatever she wanted to say next. "It's just, he's been acting really different lately. More stressed out, angry all the time, and some of the things he says about you don't match the person I've gotten to know over the past year. You've always been nothing but kind to me, and I've seen how much you care about Kieran's success and happiness. So, I guess I'm just confused about what could have caused such a big rift between you two." I sat down across from her at the kitchen table, choosing my words carefully. This was Kieran's girlfriend, not my confidant, and I needed to respect appropriate boundaries while still being honest about the situation. "Miranda, what specifically has Kieran told you about our situation?" "He said you've been holding a grudge over some kind of misunderstanding about money, and that you're trying to turn his dad against him, because you never really wanted him in the family anyway. He says you're making his senior year miserable and sabotaging his college prospects because you're jealous of his relationship with his father." The lies were absolutely breathtaking. This kid had stolen $1,500 from me, lied about it, accused me of neglect, spent months manipulating his father and everyone around him, and was now painting himself as the victim of some evil stepmother campaign designed to destroy his life. "Miranda, I want you to know that I love Kieran like my own son, which is exactly why his choices over the past few months have been so devastating to me. I can't share the specific details because they involve private family matters, but I will say this. If Kieran told you the complete truth about what happened between us, you would understand exactly why I've had to set these boundaries." She nodded slowly, processing this information. "He also told me you and his dad couldn't afford to help with his prom expenses because money was tight, but then somehow he had enough cash for a $400 tuxedo rental and a fancy dinner reservation. And he said his dad bought him those expensive sneakers for Christmas, but I remember him having them way before the holidays." Smart girl. She was connecting financial dots that I hadn't expected her to notice. "Miranda, can I give you some advice? Be very careful about lending Kieran money or giving him access to your bank accounts or credit cards. Sometimes people we care about make choices that surprise us, and it's always better to protect yourself financially until you're absolutely certain about someone's character." She left that night looking thoughtful and concerned, and I could tell the wheels were turning in her head about inconsistencies in Kieran's stories and behavior. 2 days later, Kieran came home from school in an absolute rage. "What did you say to Miranda?" he screamed at me the moment he walked through the front door. This was the first time he'd spoken directly to me in over 2 months. I was folding laundry in the living room, and I didn't even look up from the towels I was organizing. "I told her to be careful about giving you access to her money. She broke up with me. She said she couldn't trust me anymore, and it's all your fault." Now I looked at him. Really looked at him. He was 18 years old, but having a complete toddler-level meltdown, his face red and blotchy, his hands balled into fists, his entire body radiating fury and entitlement. "Kieran, if Miranda broke up with you because someone suggested she protect her finances, then maybe she already had concerns about your relationship with money and honesty. You ruined everything," he shouted, his voice cracking with emotion. "She was the best thing in my life, the only good thing I had going, and you destroyed it because you can't get over some stupid mistake I made months ago. Some stupid mistake. 4 months after committing identity theft and emotionally manipulating his family, and he still characterized his criminal behavior as a minor error in judgment. I didn't ruin anything, Kieran. Actions have consequences. If you want to blame someone for Miranda's decision to prioritize her financial safety and emotional well-being, I suggest you look in the mirror. He stormed upstairs, and I heard his bedroom door slam so hard that 2 picture frames fell off the hallway wall and shattered on the hardwood floor. That night, Thaddeus tried to intervene once again. Celestine, don't you think Miranda breaking up with him is punishment enough? He's clearly learned his lesson about the consequences of his choices. Maybe it's time to start rebuilding our family relationships and moving forward. I set down the book I was reading and looked at my husband with a mixture of love and exasperation. Thaddeus, in 4 months, your son has shown zero genuine remorse for what he did. He's lied to his friends, his girlfriend, his teachers, and probably you about what actually happened. He's painted me as some kind of vindictive stepmother in his victim narrative while conveniently forgetting that he committed identity theft against someone who loved him unconditionally. When exactly has he learned his lesson? Thaddeus was quiet for a long moment, staring at his hands. He paid back most of the money. Most isn't all. And the money was never the real issue anyway, although it certainly mattered. The issue is that he violated my trust in the most fundamental way possible, blamed me for his own criminal choices, and has spent 4 months trying to manipulate everyone around him instead of taking genuine accountability for his behavior. So, what do you want from me? You want me to kick my 18-year-old son out of the house? You want me to call the police on my own child? I want him to grow up. I want him to understand that actions have consequences that can't be negotiated away or minimized through emotional manipulation. And I want him to genuinely apologize and make things right, not because you're pressuring him to keep the peace, but because he actually understands why what he did was wrong and hurtful. Month 4 was when Kieran finally hit rock bottom. Without Miranda as his emotional support system, without my practical and academic support, and with college application deadlines looming, his entire carefully constructed world started falling apart. His grades had dropped significantly enough that 3 colleges had already sent rejection letters. He'd been benched from the soccer team for missing too many practices due to transportation issues. His social life was deteriorating because he could no longer afford to keep up with his friend group's expensive entertainment habits. The designer clothes were mostly sold off to pay his debt to me, leaving him back in thrift store finds and hand-me-downs that damaged his carefully cultivated image. And then his biological mother came for her semi-annual visit. Evelyn arrived on a Saturday morning in early June with her usual dramatic flair, flowing scarves, oversized sunglasses, and an attitude that suggested she was preparing for battle. She'd been hearing Kieran's version of events for months through their weekly phone calls, and she was clearly ready to champion her son against the evil stepmother who was supposedly ruining his life. Celestine, I need to speak with you privately, she announced, not even bothering with basic pleasantries or small talk. We sat at the kitchen table while Thaddeus took Kieran out for lunch, giving us space to hash out this family drama without the men present. My son tells me you've been punishing him for months over some misunderstanding about money, and that you're refusing to forgive him despite his apologies and efforts to make things right. This has gone entirely too far. I looked at this woman who'd spent 4 years maintaining minimal contact with her son, who sent inconsistent child support payments, who showed up maybe 3 times a year, who had never once called me to check on Kieran's well-being or academic progress. And I felt a familiar anger rising in my chest. Evelyn, has Kieran told you exactly what this misunderstanding was about? He said you accused him of taking money from your account, but that he was just borrowing it for legitimate school expenses and college preparation costs. He was planning to pay it back before you even noticed, but you overreacted and turned it into this huge family crisis. Borrowing. Without permission. Using stolen personal information, while accusing the victim of neglect and emotional unavailability. Did he mention the part where he used my personal security information to access my bank account without my knowledge or consent? Or the part where he told me I was too wrapped up in my own world to notice his needs? Or the part where, when I confronted him with evidence, He looked me in the eye and said, "Prove it," before accusing me of being a neglectful stepmother. Evelyn's confident expression wavered slightly, like someone had just told her the script she'd memorized wasn't the complete story. He also probably didn't mention that he's only paid back $800 of the $1,500 he stole, or that he spent the last 4 months telling everyone who will listen that I'm some kind of evil stepmother who's trying to destroy his family for my own entertainment. I pulled out my phone and showed her the bank statement from that February night, along with the fraud report I'd filed but never submitted to police. "This is what your son did, Evelyn. At 18 years old, he's legally an adult, and what he did is legally a felony. I have been incredibly generous in giving him the opportunity to make this right privately instead of involving law enforcement. Most people would have called the police the moment they discovered identity theft." For the first time since she'd arrived with her righteous indignation, Evelyn was completely speechless. "Now you can continue enabling his victim mentality and teaching him that stealing from family members is just a youthful indiscretion that should be forgiven and forgotten, or you can help him understand that his actions have consequences and encourage him to take genuine accountability. But either way, I'm not backing down from the boundaries I've set." Evelyn left that afternoon looking shaken and confused, and whatever conversation she had with Kieran afterward must have been brutally honest, because everything changed after that. The next evening, there was a soft, hesitant knock on our bedroom door. Thaddeus and I were reading in bed, our usual Sunday night routine, when I opened the door to find Kieran standing in the hallway looking smaller and more vulnerable than I'd seen him in years. "Celestine? Can I please talk to you?" His voice was barely above a whisper, and for the first time in months, there was no defiance or manipulation in his expression. Just genuine fear and what looked like authentic remorse. I followed him downstairs to the living room, where he sat on the edge of the couch with his hands clasped tightly in his lap, staring at the floor like he was trying to gather courage for something incredibly difficult. "I talked to my mom today," he began, his voice shaky and uncertain. "She helped me understand some things about what I did that I didn't want to see before. Or maybe I saw them, but I didn't want to admit them to myself because it was easier to blame you than face what I'd become." I waited, saying nothing, giving him space to find his words. "I need to apologize to you, Celestine. Not because Dad wants me to, or because I want you to start helping me again, or because I'm trying to manipulate you into forgiveness, but because what I did was really, really wrong and you didn't deserve any of it. Not the theft, not the lies, and especially not the blame I tried to put on you." His eyes filled with tears, real ones this time. After 4 months of watching him manipulate emotions and manufacture responses, I could finally tell the difference between genuine remorse and strategic performance. "I stole from you. I know that's exactly what it was, even though I kept calling it borrowing in my head because it sounded less criminal. I used information you trusted me with to take money that wasn't mine, and I did it in the middle of the night like a coward because I knew it was wrong. I violated your privacy, your financial security, and your trust in the worst possible way." He wiped his nose with the back of his hand, looking every bit the scared teenager he really was underneath all that manufactured bravado. "And then when you confronted me about it, instead of owning up to what I'd done like a man, I tried to make you feel like you were the problem. I gaslighted you, blamed you for my criminal behavior, and accused you of being neglectful when you've done nothing but support me for 4 years." The tears were falling freely now, and his voice was getting thick with emotion. "The stuff I said about you not caring, about you trying to replace my mom, about you being too wrapped up in your own world, that was all lies, and I knew it when I said it. You've been to more of my soccer games than my actual biological mother. You taught me how to drive stick shift when Dad was too impatient to deal with my learning curve. You stayed up until midnight helping me write my college essay about overcoming adversity, which is really ironic now that I think about it." He laughed bitterly, shaking his head at his own hypocrisy. "You know what the worst part is? When Miranda broke up with me, she said she couldn't be with someone who would steal from their family and then lie about it for months. She said if I could do that to you, someone who loved me unconditionally, then I could do it to anyone. And she was absolutely right." The confession was pouring out of him now, like a dam had finally burst after months of holding back the truth. I've spent 4 months hating you for holding me accountable, but the real truth is that I hated myself for disappointing you. It was just easier to blame you than to face what I'd turned into. Easier to paint you as the villain than admit I was the one who'd betrayed someone who'd only ever tried to help me succeed. I felt my own eyes getting misty, but I still didn't speak. This was his moment, his confession, his opportunity to finally take real accountability without me interrupting or guiding the process. I know saying sorry doesn't fix anything. I know trust isn't something you can just apologize back into existence. I know I've probably destroyed our relationship permanently, and I'll have to live with that for the rest of my life. But I want to try to make this right if you'll let me. He reached into his backpack and pulled out an envelope, his hands shaking as he set it on the coffee table between us. I've been working double shifts at the theater, and I sold my gaming system, my expensive clothes, my sneakers, basically everything I bought with your money, plus a lot of other stuff. This envelope contains the remaining $700 I owed you, plus another $1,500 as, I don't know what to call it, consequence money? Interest for the pain and betrayal? I just know that paying you back the exact amount I stole doesn't feel like enough to address the harm I caused. I opened the envelope with trembling fingers. Inside was $2,200 in cash, all small bills that clearly represented hours and hours of minimum wage work. Kieran, I also wrote you this. He handed me a letter, folded carefully and sealed in another envelope. It's everything I should have said 4 months ago, but I was too proud and too scared to admit I was wrong. I don't expect immediate forgiveness. I know I have to earn that back through consistent actions over time. But I wanted you to know that I finally understand the full scope of what I did, and I'm going to spend however long it takes proving that I'm better than the person who stole from you. I read the letter right there, with him watching nervously from across the room. It was 4 pages of genuine accountability, specific acknowledgments of harm caused, detailed recognition of how his actions had affected not just me but our entire family dynamic, and concrete steps he planned to take to rebuild trust and demonstrate changed behavior. No excuses. No sob stories about peer pressure or family stress. Just complete ownership of his choices and their consequences. When I finished reading, I looked up at this young man who'd put me through emotional hell for 4 months, and I saw something I'd been waiting to see: genuine remorse, real growth, and authentic understanding of the gravity of his actions. Kieran, I accept your apology. And I'm proud of you for doing the incredibly difficult work of facing your mistakes honestly and taking full accountability without trying to minimize or excuse what you did. He broke down then, really broke down, and I found myself crossing the room to hug him while he sobbed against my shoulder like the frightened child he still was in many ways. I'm so sorry, Celestine. I'm so sorry. I love you, and I almost destroyed everything because I was too immature and selfish to handle my mistakes like an adult. I love you too, kiddo. That's exactly why this hurts so much, and that's exactly why your apology and accountability mean everything to me. We sat there for a long time, both of us crying, both of us finally able to begin the real work of healing and rebuilding trust. The road back wasn't immediate or automatic. Trust, once shattered, takes time and consistent action to rebuild. But over the following months, Kieran proved through his behavior that his transformation was genuine and lasting. He got into a good college, with scholarship assistance that I was happy to help him navigate. He found a new girlfriend who appreciated his newfound maturity and integrity. He started checking in with me before making any significant financial decisions, not because I demanded it, but because he wanted to rebuild my confidence in his judgment and include me in his life in healthy ways. Most importantly, he became the young man I'd always hoped he could be, someone who could face his mistakes honestly, take accountability without excuses, and understand that real strength comes from admitting when you're wrong and working to make things right. The $1,500 he originally stole went back into my savings account. The extra $1,500 became his college fund contribution, a tangible reminder that making genuine amends sometimes means going above and beyond the minimum requirement to demonstrate real change.